everyone. Thomas Kerrigan with FCTV. Today we're here with the Fire Training Division here at Barnstable County. I'm here with Neil. Neil, what do we have going on behind us today?
So today we're demonstrating our fire extinguisher prop. Basically, we can make some fire. Individuals can come over and practice their skills at using a fire extinguisher.
So we see the car and the trailer behind us. What is that normally used for?
The car itself is a different prop. We can use that for simulated car fires. We set it up kind of the same way, but the gas piping goes to the car parts.
Fantastic. And of course, you're demonstrating fire extinguishers today.
Yes.
So how important is it to choose the right type, and how do you want to operate a fire extinguisher if you're trying to extinguish a fire?
So, yep, most of your commercial or your extinguishers are class A, B, and C. That will pretty much take care of most. Class A being your ordinary combustibles, Class B being liquefied gases, and then C is electrical products. So those three encompasses all of them. They do make other ones, but for the most general public, those are the ones you're going to use.
How about kitchen fires? I'm guessing grease fires in kitchens are a leading cause of fires in the kitchen. So how should someone fight those if they have a fire extinguisher or if they don't have a fire extinguisher? What's the best way? Fire
extinguisher, if you have it, you're going to pull your pin, aim, squeeze, and sweep. If you don't have an extinguisher and you have a cover it up. The action goes away and should go right out.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to add before I let you go and we take a look at the demo?
Again, using a fire extinguisher is a quick and easy. If you seem that you're not making any progress, then move away from the fire. Obviously, you'll be calling 911 in any event of a fire. But if you can't get it within 10 to 15 seconds, back out. You don't need to get yourself injured.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And what is that remote you have in your hands? Can you explain that a little
bit? A gas fed prop that we use electronics. This box over here is the control panel, the computer. So as I push the button, I can control the gas. So when the participants coming towards the prop, they're doing their thing, they pull the pin, they aim, they're sweeping. If I see they're doing a good job, I release, gas goes out.
So this is the Barnstable County Dredge Department. We operate 2 dredges that dredge channels on Cape Cod for every town except for Brewster. Our season starts in September. We're getting ready to start a big project in Mashpee, and we usually go all the way through the winter and end in May.
Fantastic. Could you tell me a little bit about what that project entails in Mashpee?
Yeah, the project in Mashpee is going to be the largest project the county dredge has ever done. It's an expansion of a project that we do every year. The channel is going to be longer, wider, and deeper. It's about 57,000 cubic yards, which is a pretty high target volume for us. Usually our projects can be 3,000, 10,000, 20,000, but this one is going to be very large, and we are hoping to be starting someday next week.
That's fantastic. You said this goes all the way through when?
This project will probably take us to December, hopefully. No later than that, and then we have other projects that we'll be moving on one of our other dredges onto.
That's really awesome. Is there anything else you think the general public should know about dredging here in Barnstable County?
I think one of the most important things is that we are doing probably one of the most important services for the Cape. Most people don't realize it because we do it in the wintertime, and we are really saving taxpayers a tremendous amount of money because we are a regional dredging program doing work for the towns at a very, very low rate as compared to private contractors. The program was set up back in 1996, so it's been running almost 30 years now with the intent of providing these dredging services to the towns at very, very good rates compared to private contractors.
And this all happens, of course, we need to dredge because sand keeps filling in, right?
Yeah, so the big challenge, obviously, on the Cape is that we are one big sand pit. And sand doesn't care. It doesn't have borders of where it's going to be or where it's not going to be. So right now is a lot of sand that's moving. Projects have to be done every year in some places just because the sand is continuously moving.
What do you guys do here at the Water Quality Lab?
We do a lot of different things. We test drinking water as well as wastewater and also surface water. So my job is to coordinate our bathing beach monitoring program. So we're looking at freshwater beaches as well as saltwater beaches for fecal bacteria.
Fantastic. So where do you guys usually see elevated levels of these? Is it usually after rainfall, or like how does that work?
Yes, definitely. After periods of heavy rain, we're seeing a lot of stormwater runoff from the streets and the parking lots, and we tend to see higher levels of fecal bacteria after those events. And also, hurricanes or passing storms can kind of stir up the seas and bring things in that we might otherwise not see. And yeah, at lower tides we can see higher levels, but it's pretty variable, and that's why we monitor every week just to see how things are going throughout the summer.
Now, you said you monitor these beaches every week. How bad does it have to be for a beach to close?
There are specific regulations, and they're issued through the Department of Public Health at the state level. So we have to see 2 consecutive failures in order for a beach to have to close. There are a few beaches that have to close after a single exceedance if they've had a history of high counts. But yeah, we usually need to see 2 consecutive exceedances. So there's got to be a persisting problem. We immediately go back to retest a beach if we see a failure, and we notify the health departments as soon as we see those failures and as soon as a closure is required.
Fantastic. I see we have something set up right here. Can you explain this a little bit?
So this is our UV reader. We analyze all of our samples in the lab. We're creating these trays that are filled with the sample and the bacteria media. And when you look into the UV reader, you're looking for fluorescence. The bacteria, the way that we run our samples, they grow and fluoresce under UV light when they interact and feed on the media. So looking in the UV light, you're looking for the blue squares that are glowing. And we count those blue squares and use a table to calculate a final result. And that tells us whether it's a failure or not.
Fantastic. Is there anything else you think the general public should know about your department and what you guys do?
The water lab is open year-round. In addition to the beach monitoring, we encourage anyone with a private well to test their water at least annually for some basic parameters like bacteria and metals. You can come to the laboratory and pick up a kit for free, and then you collect your sample and you'll pay for analysis depending on what you're analyzing for when you return the sample to the lab. We just started analyzing in the lab for PFAS, which is a contaminant of emerging concern, especially on the Cape. And it's a good idea if you have a private well to test if you can, at least once.
Now, how much do those tests usually run approximately?
Our basic routine analysis, which is a good place to start, costs $70 for the standard turnaround time. The PFAS test, one sample, it starts at $265 for the standard turnaround. And then we also offer volatile organic testing, and that starts at $120 if you want to do that. But we have a full list of all of our testing and prices on our website.
So you guys are working on revamping the courthouse. Can you tell us a little bit about that project, what it entails, and what you're doing?
Yes, so the courthouse is built in 1831, so it's a historic building on the Mass Register, and we're also subject to Old Kings Highway District. So we're looking at an exterior improvement. So the granite is going to be repointed, the wooden facade restored, and the front columns will be restored. We've been through the Old Kings Highway permitting process. They've received the project positively. The one issue we're going through right now, as far as coordination with the courts, we own the buildings. The trial courts are our tenant, so we're trying to figure out during that course of construction where they're going to be. So we hope to get that resolved over the next month and then lay out a construction schedule, which we're hoping would be starting next year.
Fantastic. Thank you. Do you guys have any other interesting projects or initiatives you're working on at the moment?
We have quite a bit of different things going on as far as our department goes. We have a PFAS remediation at the former Fire Training Academy, where currently right now we have a permeable reactive barrier being installed. It's essentially a carbon slurry which gets injected to the ground, which will pick up as groundwater travels through. It'll pick up PFAS, which is a hazardous material, and the clean groundwater will travel through accordingly. So we're working on that right now. That construction should be done at the end of October. We're also looking at a master plan right now for county space planning and facility conditions assessment. We have deferred maintenance we're looking at and coming up with a plan, working with the trial courts to move forward with that work over the next decade or two.
MassTC does research on cutting-edge, innovative alternative wastewater solutions, specifically the on-site or septic system solutions that are going to be really important to towns across Barnstable County as they try to meet their comprehensive watershed management goals.
Fantastic. I know you guys just got renamed and you got a recent expansion. What's going to encompass? What's that going to encompass?
Right, so we are now the Cape Cod Clean Water Center, which includes the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center, as well as the Aqua Fund and the Septic Utility Program. All of our programs designed to support Barnstable County communities and towns as they pay for innovative alternative wastewater solutions, as we research on those solutions, and as we manage those solutions. So we have programs to help with really every facet of making sure that Barnstable County is meeting our wastewater management goals. And then I'll also say, while we are very focused on Barnstable County, we do have a global reach, and that is why we have gotten some additional funding recently from both the Massachusetts Technology Collaborative, which is a state institution, and the Gates Foundation, which is of course a private institution. And we're really excited about both of those additions. They're going to be able to let us expand our facilities and be able to expand our offerings and our certifications that we have that will help Barnstable County, but will also help us support partners to meet global sanitation goals. So that's really exciting.
That's awesome. And it's you guys that have the new grand opening of the wastewater treatment plant offside a Joint Base Cape Cod, correct?
That's correct. That is happening September 26th, and we are really excited about the ribbon cutting.
Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So that's going to be an event for some people who are really supportive of the program, some state officials, some local officials, and that's going to be the ribbon cutting on our new building. So we have a new building that's got a bunch of new great offices for our staff, as well as a training center and some other meeting space. So it'll be a ribbon cutting on that, and it'll also be a groundbreaking on our new laboratory that's going to support the new Gates Foundation project.
That's absolutely fantastic. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we let you go?
I think that really sums it up. Really, we're here to support the towns, support communities, and support wastewater goals across the region.
I'm one of 15 elected delegates to the Barnstable County Assembly of Delegates, which represents individual communities but also represents the region as a whole and tries to facilitate ideas and concepts that will benefit the entire region while also helping to serve the communities in a way that makes them not have to find extra money to cover the same things. So it's a mutually beneficial alliance.
Fantastic. So people have a general understanding of what their town and state and federal governments do, but some might not have a complete grasp on how county government works. Can you explain the difference between the Assembly of Delegates and the county commissioners? Sure.
It's pretty easy when you break it down. The Assembly, the county commissioners, there are three. They are partisan elections, and they run on the parties to which they are affiliated, and their terms of office are 4 years, and so two of them are elected every 4 years, and then one is elected by. This year it's just one. That will be on the ballot. And their role is to oversee the operations of the county and the county departments in a variety of different ways, whether it's budget, putting together a budget, whether it's looking at new ideas that might come across that could be beneficial for the communities, or looking at grants and awarding them to various departments for the kind of grant money that is brought into the county, which is pretty substantial. So they're kind of the executive branch, if you will, and then there's the 15-member assembly, which are also elected but they're elected by the communities. The commissioners are elected by the entire region. The assembly members are elected by their communities, and when the laws were first put together, it was decided that would best benefit, because then every community would have one representative and a voice in this particular legislative body, and that's what the Assembly does. Is we are a legislative body, and we also oversee we approve the budgets and things like that are that can use a check and balance, if you will, to make sure that we're all working in the same way, and we introduce legislation where appropriate or where possible, and we frequently work with delegates. I mean, with state representatives and state political officials. The thing that's unique about the Assembly is that we are not elected by partisanship. We are nonpartisan, and so we don't, when we run for office, we don't put big signs up that we're on this party or that party. We're simply there as a group of individuals who wish to hopefully improve the region and our communities in the process.
The Assembly of Delegates recently proposed a tax on homes selling for more than $2 million, which is to be used to increase affordable housing. Could you explain what that tax will be, how it will be enacted, and where the funds will be used? It's actually, that concept is actually in the early stages, very early stages. And the reason I say that is because a lot of those finite details have not been completely worked out. But it is apparent after a lot of research on housing and how additional funding could be found to try to solve this incredibly difficult problem here on the Cape, and that is the lack of housing for moderate to lower income families, and also for people who work here and want to continue to work here but have to go over the bridge every day in order to get here. We have a growing base in real estate, which has increased in value over the last 5 years substantially, and a part of that is a result of the pandemic, where people who may have had second homes here have decided they want to live here full time, or they moved into their second homes and decided to get rid of the houses they had in other parts of Massachusetts, and the idea is to gather this money, put it into some type of a trust so that it's very well protected. It's not like I could decide, gee, I have something I want to do in the county for this, and why can't I use that money? It will be earmarked for the purpose that it's meant for, and the way it would be executed has also not been worked out yet, because it would be in this trust, and there would have to be a way in which and a criteria for you to be able to consider to be taken advantage of it. But when you look at stuff like this, getting it going, getting it started, getting people behind it, and making sure that the way you do it really does begin to solve the problem is really, really critical. And we have a couple of other programs that were kind of set up this way, and they have been very successful. So that's kind of what it is at this point, but something has to happen in order for us to start to address this. When you look at over 80% are single-family homes on the Cape, and many, over 50%, I don't have the exact numbers because I didn't crib sheet this, but they're second homes. There's a need to make sure we balance this out so that this beautiful place that is really, really magnificent it can be maintained, and the part that draws everybody to it can be enjoyed by everyone. Do you have any other legislation or initiatives you're working on that viewers should keep an eye out for? We look at a lot of things, but it takes time for legislation to get through. When I first joined the Assembly, I was told that it could take more than 2 years or longer, and since the Assembly is a 2-year election, you sometimes lose some of the people that were enthused about the particular project you're working on, and there are new people that don't know that much about it that you have to bring up to speed, and so it does take a while to get it into play because of the steps that are required. Every 5 years, the Assembly has been charged with
reviewing the charter and, like creating outdated language, fixing outdated language, or looking at some points that might no longer apply just because it's an older concept or whatever. And the Assembly set up a charter committee which has been working already for about 6 or 7 months, and the commissioners decided that they want to try to have a charter committee elected to look at the charter. It kind of all happened right at the time that the current charter committee that's in play said that they felt it was important to look at the structure. And the structure is the actual makeup of how many people are assembly people, how many people are chartered, do we need them all, so at this point the resolution has been put forth by the commissioners, and in fact that will probably, if the state approves it, that will be on the next ballot. So, and what does that mean for the charter committee that's already started? We're not quite sure yet. So, I think that we could have come to the same conclusions that the commissioners were hoping would be addressed, which is the structure, but we just, the overlap, and this predates me in terms of how long that's been in discussion. So.
My title is County Commissioner for Barnstable County, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I guess we'll get right into the interview. So people have a general understanding of what their town, state, and federal government are responsible for, but some might not really have a complete grasp on how the county government works. Could you describe the responsibilities of the county commissioners and how your legislation affects citizens of Barnstable County?
Sure. The county commissioners basically oversee the operations of county government. One of the reasons why many people are unaware of what we do is because a lot of the support, a lot of the assistance, a lot of the work that we do is in support of what the towns do. So in many cases, if we're doing a flu clinic, for example, through our health program, we often do that in conjunction with the local health department, the local council on aging. You may see county nurses there, but it looks like it's very local. Fire training assistance, oftentimes that work is done at individual fire departments, and it makes it easier, convenient for the firefighters that are there to get training from the county at their location. And that's kind of the way it runs across the board. Our dredging program is a very well-known program. We provide dredging assistance to all of the towns. So when in your community, if you happen to see the county dredge, we don't have a huge poster board or display saying Barnstable County Dredge. It might say the codfish, or it might have the name of the vessel. But in many cases, residents, when they see us at work in their communities, it's usually in tandem with the local officials, whether it's the harbor master, the health agent, council on aging. A lot of our services and the assistance that we provide to the residents of Barnstable County is often filtered and done in coordination and partnership with the towns.
And can you differentiate real fast, what's the difference between the county commission and the Assembly of Delegates?
Well, we're kind of like the way government is structured in your local community. Falmouth has a representative town meeting, but the people that sort of run the day-to-day business, that's the town administrator, and he's overseen by a board of selectmen or a select board. The county runs in a very, very similar way. Our town meeting is the Assembly of Delegates. They're the legislative body. They review the budgets at the end of the day and sign off on the budgets. And if they have disagreements, we tend to sort of deliberate and discuss those disagreements and work them out. The commissioners, we have an administrator, and his job is to sort of oversee the day-to-day operations. But our job as county commissioners, much like a local select board, is to provide overall oversight, provide general direction. We're the principal policymakers for county government. We're the ones that make a decision as to the range of services that we provide, how we go about doing them, what the best structure is, and that sort of thing. The other thing that we do is we're very involved in working with other federal and state agencies to bring money to Barnstable County. That's one of the things that the county does that's often overlooked, is for us, each year we bring millions of dollars in grant funds from the state and federal government that is not normally or would otherwise be available to the towns. So we bring tremendous resources to the towns that sometimes they on their own can't pursue by themselves.
That's fantastic. And I know you guys just approved the creation of an elected charter study commission. Can you explain what the commission will be studying and why this is important?
Sure. To sort of bring it to sort of a similar situation, let's say in Falmouth or in the Upper Cape, not too long ago the town of Falmouth wanted to go from a full-time select board and transition to a part-time select board with the paid administrator, manager, and a representative town meeting. So the process by creating that form of governance was through creating a locally elected charter commission. That group of residents in Falmouth, there were probably between 10 and 15 residents elected, probably at least one from every precinct. They gathered, they came together, and they made a set of recommendations on how to address some of the challenges facing Falmouth. And so Falmouth has undergone a significant change in its governance, and that happened through creating a local charter commission that's allowed under state law. So in Barnstable County, we have the ability under state law to create a regional elected charter commission. That was the last time it was done was in 1988, when it created the charter that basically sort of lays out the structure of our government today in the county, which is the commissioners, the assembly, and so forth. And it's time to do that again, because many of the challenges that were identified back in the 80s, we still have to address. And there have been some concerns that some of the powers of the assembly and the commissioners may be in conflict or may need to be better clarified. So the whole idea is to fix and resolve some of the well-documented problems and issues with our structure, have an independent group involved in doing that, and then ultimately they can render a report, and actually if they have specific charter changes they want to make, those can be put before the voters directly. They can do that directly.
Also, I noticed you guys just recently voted to expand the Mass TC and renamed it to the Barnstable County Clean Water Center. Can we explain what that initiative started or how it started and what they're expanding to?
Well, how it started is a very, very interesting story. The alternative septic system test center is what we call it now, and that's what we've called for probably 40 some odd years. I actually was involved in the very beginning of the creation of this center, because in my past life I worked for Congressman Gary Studs, and Barnstable County, along with scientists and representatives from the Coalition for Buzzards Bay, came to the congressman's office looking for support for a grant from EPA to develop this idea that they had come up with together, the county and the coalition. They had come up together, and the idea was to test and evaluate innovative septic system technologies, innovative ways to go about dealing with the common waste that we generate, in our homes. The current technology's been pretty much in existence for a while, and there's some new technologies that are coming out that are being developed, and there are others that have been developed that need to be tested. So to have a center that can test these new technologies and evaluate their performance with scientists and other experts in this field, we felt was an incredibly important exercise to pursue. So the Septic System Test Center has been in existence for a while. It's received funding from a number of sources, foundations, government agencies. It's incredibly well respected. Think of it as the UL for electric appliances, right? When you go to the appliance store, you get or buy a toaster or a refrigerator, you'll see on it UL tested. So what that means to the consumer is that it works, right? It's a safe, it's a workable product. This alternative septic system test center basically fulfills the same role. It provides information, a certification that this technology works under certain circumstances. And so we, and particularly in Falmouth and in the Upper Cape, there's a lot of interest in developing this new technologies to deal with septic waste. So the way the plant works is that effluent from wastewater from the Coast Guard housing area on Joint Base Cape Cod flows to a treatment plant. But the test center is in between the treatment plant and the Coast Guard housing area. So the test center intercepts a wastewater flow. It utilizes that flow to test new technologies, and then whatever residual is in the ground ultimately is collected and eventually returns to the treatment center. Obviously, it's cleaner water. It's been treated to some degree before it goes to a treatment plant. So it's all self-contained. There's nothing that leaches into the ground and goes down gradient into Falmouth or Mashpee. It's located right next to the wastewater treatment plant, so it's very convenient to get to. And they've done a great job. So we're in the process of helping the center grow. We see a need to basically provide more facilities for more universities, more companies. The state of Massachusetts actually sees the emergence of a clean water industry cluster in the state. The state itself has identified our test center as an important asset in terms of nurturing new businesses in the clean water space. So we've been very successful in attracting funds from the state of Massachusetts, the Gates Foundation, other organizations to really host more companies, more universities, more organizations to work with us to test and evaluate all sorts of septic system technologies. And so we would love to think that while we're cleaning up the environment here on Cape Cod, we're creating good jobs, good clean jobs, you could say.
Barnstable County, along with the rest of Cape Cod, is currently facing a housing crisis. What initiatives have the county commissioners taken to address that issue recently?
Well, the county commissioners have done a lot. We've been really, we've benefited from the Congress and the last administration providing a significant amount of funding under the American Rescue Plan Act. It's referred to as ARPA. ARPA funding has come to the Cape to support a whole host of initiatives, and we have set aside a significant chunk of that money to support a number of housing initiatives. We provided a modest amount of money to the Cape Cod Commission to put together a regional housing strategy working with our towns. We put funds together for a number of housing projects from one end of the Cape to create inventory for affordable housing. So we spent a lot of money to develop new housing units, and we have helped towns develop new tools, new strategies for going about supporting affordable housing in their communities. So we'd love to do more. I think we have some new initiatives coming down the road. One of them that's sort of in the works right now is this regional shared housing services initiative. That is a county program that provides direct support for those professionals working in municipal governments and town governments that are actually working on affordable housing, but they may not have the technical support, they may not have the expertise right there at town hall to support maybe evaluating a project, reviewing a new zoning change, or some other type of measure that will help them develop affordable housing. So the county has had this pilot project for the past year or so, and we are now past the pilot phase. The towns like this program, they want this program. There's tremendous interest on the Upper Cape to participate in a regional shared housing services program, and so we're getting ready to. In fact, we sort of officially put together a funding request at today's meeting that we'll send over to the Assembly to sort of get this initiative off the ground.
Would there be anything else you'd like to add about any recent legislation or initiatives that the commissioners are working on?
Well, the Assembly's working on examining a regional housing transfer tax to generate revenue. This would be on luxury homes, and it would be designed to generate a stream of money that can be used to actually underwrite the cost of affordable housing or other measures that can help people stay in their homes. For example, the town of Provincetown has an incentive program where if you own property and make a commitment to rent it for a year-round resident, you'll actually get a payment as part of that. There are other towns that are purchasing housing and putting deed restrictions on the housing, or buying a deed restriction on housing, so that that property is used for year-round purposes. As I think everyone knows, there's huge interest in developing and owning and managing seasonal properties, and that sometimes can put too much pressure on the year-round housing market. And so in communities that are struggling with this, these are some additional tools that we have been talking about supporting, both here on the Cape, but also with our legislators, our legislative delegation, Senator Fernandez, Senator Sear, and our state representatives. Everybody's been very much involved in these discussions. And the one thing about politics on Cape Cod is that the Cape comes first. We're Cape Codders first, and Democrats, Republicans, vegetarians, Unitarians, whatever those other affiliations are, they're generally second. So we do a really good job of working together as a team on behalf of our towns.
And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Barnstable County Open House. It's been a great day so far. You've had the opportunity to get to the other side and visit all our various departments. That's been helpful for me. I'm Michael Dutton. I'm the county administrator. I've been here for almost a year, and I'm still meeting people in the other room that I haven't met yet, staff that works for me. So it's been a great day and a great opportunity to see what the county does and kind of explore some of the things that most people don't really know about. Overall, I think this event is a lot about celebrating our history and our shared mission, and giving you a chance to connect with a lot of our dedicated staff and the people that do the work on a day-to-day basis throughout the 15 towns on Cape Cod. And so I hope you'll leave here today with a much better understanding of how regional government works, and certainly more important right now, a shared sense of, or a shared appreciation for our Cape Cod history and what it brings to the table every day for all of us. So I want to introduce Phineas Fisk. He will be our first speaker, and Phineas is a member of the board of directors of Tales of Cape Cod. He retired in 1994 as senior editorial writer at Newsday, which was a local, I shouldn't say local, it was a Long Island newspaper. He was trustee of the Northport, New York Historical Society before moving to Barnstable in 2009, and so we are very lucky to have him with us. He also wrote and produced Tales of Cape Cod's award-winning video documentary about the old colonial courthouse. Phineas holds degrees from Harvard College and Stony Brook University, and certainly we thank him and Tales of Cape Cod for our wonderful collaboration over the years. They've been an important part of many things that the county has done over the years. Today he'll be sharing a little bit about the 1685 founding of Barnstable County, obviously predating the founding of our country by many decades. And he's going to outline some of the local resistance to the Intolerable Acts. And in addition, he's going to talk to us a little bit about the fascinating history of the old colonial courthouse. So join me in welcoming Phineas Fisk.
Thank you, and good afternoon. If anybody can't hear me, please let me know. I'll try to project more than I am now. This is the month of September. It is on September 27, 3 Saturdays from now, that Cape Cod observes Barnstable County Independence Day, inspired by an event in 1774 that took place in the old county colonial courthouse just a bit east here on Route 6A. It was on that day that Cape Cod won its freedom from Great Britain, ensuring that democracy here would prevail. Almost 2 years before, the United Colonies declared America's independence in Philadelphia. That was due to the actions of Barnstable County's leadership. You'll see a documentary about that day and about the old colonial courthouse where it happened. But first, let's see how this all came about. And listen while you do to a couple of themes that run through this account. We go back here to the Mayflower, which brought the first Puritan settlers here in 1620. Aboard that boat, the British subjects signed an agreement that defined the way they would govern themselves, a most fundamental exercise in democracy when they settled in the New World. They were coming to what they understood to be virgin territory. There was no authority here to determine where they could settle or how they should rule themselves. The people were in charge. That act of absolute democracy would be reflected in the new colony's governance and would set a standard that would be reflected in future generations' expectations in Massachusetts. They settled on a location that they would call Plymouth and set about creating their new lives. As time passed, population increased and new towns were established on Cape Cod, including Barnstable, Sandwich, and Yarmouth, incorporated in 1639. Just a few years before, in 1630, another colony, Massachusetts Bay, had been settled just north of Plymouth. Plymouth's population had grown so much in 1685, under the leadership of elected Governor Thomas Hinckley, that the colony was divided into 3 counties, Barnstable, Plymouth, and Bristol, to provide services regionally that the individual towns could not sensibly do for themselves. They served functions not too different from today. The counties provided courts to administer the laws, sheriffs to look after things, and jails for the miscreants. The counties kept records of deeds and other important documents and organized local militias. In 1686, King James decided that the spread of England's New World colonies could be better managed if they were united under a single ruler. So he called for the creation of the Dominion of New England, with authority over colonies in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. But the people grew unhappy with this arrangement. Under the Dominion, they lost much of their traditional autonomy. Local officials who previously had been elected in the towns would be chosen by the new government. Town meetings, that fundamental form of democracy, were discouraged. The various colonies' royal charters were revoked. Control was increasingly consigned to the king's appointed governor, Edmund Andros, situated in Dominion headquarters in Boston. In 1689, after 3 years, the citizens had had as much of this as they were willing to take. They rebelled. They took over the Dominion headquarters in Boston, rejected its rules, and arrested Andros, who was sent back to England. The timing was propitious. King James had been replaced by King William, who had no commitment to the Dominion plan, and in 1691 he restored the colony's charters, merging Plymouth with neighboring Massachusetts Bay Colony, thereby creating the province of Massachusetts Bay. He appointed a governor, but otherwise the new charters allowed the citizenry to return to much of their democratic ways. Town meetings, once again, were the center of political matters, setting local taxes and choosing local officials. The recently created counties would function as extension of the royal government, which appointed judges and some other officials of the courts. That benign political arrangement was to last for the next 83 years, as Barnstable County and the rest of the county grew and prospered. But starting about 1723, Great Britain began to impose taxes on various goods to finance the debt it had run up in its war with France, including providing a protection to the colonies from the French north in Canada. There were taxes on sugar, on paint, on glass, on goods made of pewter, of paper documents, and there were taxes on tea. The colonists resisted the taxation, pointing out they had no voice in their making. That resistance would have far-reaching consequences, and Massachusetts counties would be the central players in the resulting conflict and would become instruments of the preservation of democratic freedom. So, thanks to the agreement of Barnstable County's leaders, Cape Cod was free to enjoy the same political freedom that the colonies had been assured by the 1691 Royal Charter. It was Judge Otis, the governor's principal representative in Barnstable County, whose agreement had led the way. In fact, 4 of his children had leading roles in the rebellion, one of them being Mercy, who you will be hearing about shortly. But now, the old rulers being rejected, the province was left with no government at all. That was soon corrected. 2 weeks later, the previously elected members of the Massachusetts House of Representatives considered the circumstances and declared themselves to be the Provisional Congress of the province of Massachusetts. It took over necessary functions of government formerly exercised by the royal appointees and assumed their responsibilities, and quickly arranged for elections of additional delegates, allowing citizens of Massachusetts to formally validate their assumed authority. The British, who had been trapped in Boston by the provincials as a consequence of the Battle of Lexington and Concord, decided in early 1776 that their position was indefensible, and they abandoned their last stronghold in Massachusetts, removing the last blemish of the provinces on the province's freedom. In July of that year, 1776, representatives of the American colonies meeting in Philadelphia voted to approve a Declaration of Independence to guide the newly forming nation. It said, "Governments are instituted among men endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it's the right of the people to alter it." Massachusetts had asserted by its rebellion that sentiment. Back in Massachusetts, the provincial government would continue until the people voted in 1780 to ratify a new constitution, now the oldest written constitution still in force today anywhere in the world, and a model for the U.S. Constitution, which went into effect in March of 1789. Cape Cod grew apace. In 1827, a small disaster struck in Barnstable when the county house, which had been built to house the records that officials had at first kept at home, was destroyed by a fire, including virtually all the records that were kept there. By 1834, the county had outgrown its little colonial-era courthouse, and a handsome new courthouse was built, constructed of fire-resistant granite on a hillock overlooking Barnstable Village. Over the years, additional structures have been built, including new ones designed to safely store the county's accumulated deeds, resulting in the court complex that you see here today, including the building in which you are now situated. And if there's any questions, I could be happy to attempt to respond. If not, Mercy is here. All right? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Phineas. I just want to just take a moment to thank somebody that is with us today, former county commissioner and county treasurer Mary LeClaire, who is here and is dressed as Mercy Otis Warren. And I thank Mary for for doing all she has done and all she does for the county, and she's very supportive of what we do. Mercy, not Mary, but Mercy, was West Barnstable's trailblazing political activist and writer during the American Revolution, and you'll be hearing more about her in a moment. But I'd also like to thank Susan Wally, who's here with Mary, who had previously taught a class about Mercy Otis Warren at Cape Cod Community College and is responsible for producing the coloring book, which is right here, which we have available if anybody is interested in coloring. I love coloring. Takes my mind off of everything else. In any case, let me introduce our next speaker, Nancy Rubin Stewart, who is an accomplished historian and journalist. Nancy is the author of several books, including Poor Richard's Women, Defiant Brides, The Muse of the Revolution, and the national bestseller American Empress. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, the New England Quarterly, and many other publications. She's also served as executive director of the Cape Cod Writers Center. She's been a columnist for the Saturday Evening Post and president of the Mercy Otis Warren Society. And today we are lucky to have Nancy highlight the lasting legacy of Mercy Otis Warren as a trailblazing writer during the American Revolution. So please welcome me. Please join me in welcoming Nancy Rubin Stewart.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Well, Mercy would be pleased because it's just a few days after her birthday. If we go by the old style, she was born in 1728 on September 14th. If we go by the new style, it'll be September 25th. And so I'm trying to get this off here because I'm kind of clutching the microphone. Success. Thank you. So Mercy was born 297 years ago, about 2.5 miles from here. You know where the Cape Cod 5, one of our sponsors today, a bank is over in West Barnstable, and if you just look across the street, even though it's kind of overgrown, there's a little plaque where her home was. She was the daughter of James Otis and Mercy Allen, and she was the first daughter, the third child. Mary Allen had 13 children. And Mercy was expected to be a good colonial wife and mother, but she grew up, so therefore she was to be schooled in all the many duties that a colonial woman would have to assume. There was a problem, however. She was intellectual, she was curious, and she had her oldest brother, who was James Otis Jr. And James was headed for Harvard, and of course he was being tutored by his uncle, and nearby, actually, right near where the old meeting house is, there, and James Russell. And she wanted to go with her brother to these tutoring sessions. And of course her mother was furious, and she should be learning how to cook and make candles and do laundry, even though they were wealthy people. James Otis Sr. was not only a farmer, a gentleman farmer, he was an entrepreneur, he was also involved in the General Assembly, and at one time one of the leaders. And so, you know, there were plenty of servants, but of course a colonial woman needed to know how to do everything herself, because what if there wasn't help and she needed to? Well, there was a battle, I'm sure, that went on, because Mercy, who writes about just about everyone she knows, doesn't write much about her mother. All she says was her mother was, quote, learned in the precept, end of quote. So we know there was some ruffling. But anyway, she was her father's favorite, and he agreed she could go to the tutoring sessions with her brother, and she could learn and read all the great writers, and she could learn Greek and Roman and ancient history. She couldn't learn languages, but she learned everything else that her brother did in preparation for Harvard. And that's how she became so well educated. That's all good and fine. She seems to have also been a very accomplished homemaker. The Pilgrim Hall Museum has, right now things are under construction there, but they have her tea table instead of, which is really quite remarkable, her needlepoint on there is really incredible. It's actually been on tour to a number of fabric places, but before this. So when the hall is open again, we hope you'll get to see it. So she was a very accomplished. Well, there was a battle, I'm sure, that went on because Mercy, who writes about just about everyone she knows, doesn't write much about her mother. All she says was her mother was, quote, learned in the precept, end of quote. So we know there was some ruffling. But anyway, she was her father's favorite, and he agreed she could go to the tutoring sessions with her brother, and she could learn and read all the great writers, and she could learn Greek and Roman and ancient history. She couldn't learn languages, but she learned everything else that her brother did in preparation for Harvard. And that's how she became so well educated. That's all good and fine. She seems to have also been a very accomplished homemaker. The Pilgrim Hall Museum has, right now things are under construction there, but they have her tea table. Instead of, which is really quite remarkable, her needlepoint on there is really incredible. It's actually been on tour to a number of fabric places, but before this. So when the hall is open again, we hope you'll get to see it. So she was a very accomplished in every single way, but she didn't get married till she was 26. And historians, of course, have scratched their heads and said, why? Why was she so late? That's too late for most colonial women. The theory, of course, the feminist scholarships have jumped in since then and said, well, of course, because she was too learned. She scared off the men. And I'm sure she did. She had a formidable intelligence and she had incredible knowledge. Well, ultimately, she did marry her brother's classmate, James Warren, and she left at that point. She left West Barnstable, where she'd grown up, and moved to Plymouth. He was the son of the sheriff. He soon became the sheriff. His father passed away. And they lived in two places. They lived downtown Court Street. That building is still there. Some of you may have seen it. It has a pizza parlor in it right now and other things, but it's been there for a long, long time, and we are told we're going to get it eventually painted and the plaque will be put back out there. But anyway, there and also on Clifford Street, that home is still existing, and myself and one of our members, board members from the Mercy Otis Society is there, Doug Azaleas in the back, and we've had the pleasure of being in that home. And much of it has been, of course, changed, but much of it is still as it was, and it overlooks the Eel River. It has a good morning staircase where the staircase is about 70 degrees to get to the second floor. But so it was fun to see this. I saw it many years ago when I started to research the book. Now, people always ask me, what made me research it? I was living in Manhattan at the time, had written a number of books on women's history, and when I read her history in Elizabeth Elliot's Women of the American Revolution, I became fascinated. I said, how come we don't know so much about her? I mean, I was not living here. And then I found out that there a number of people had raised money for about 10 years, and I think it was in 2001 that finally the statue of Mercy Warren was finally announced and displayed here in the courthouse, opposite, of course, her brother, Jemmy. Jemmy is her brother, her older brother. Well, Jemmy had a big mouth. Aside from being a very brilliant lawyer, great command of English law, really superb, he became very upset in the early 1760s with all of the events that actually Phineas has described, some of them that began to go on, including the taxes and the oppressions and the writs of assistance. And he finally took Governor Hutchison and other officials at that time to court in the State House, and it had the fun of speaking there in the old State House down in Boston, had the fun of speaking in that room where he contested for a long time what the British were doing to the American colonists. And that was, he did not win the case because, of course, the judges were all British subjects and friends of the king, or at least associates of the king. However, he had a very substantial practice as an attorney. He had many wealthy clients, including John Hancock, so he was doing very well. But Jemmy became united with other people like John Adams and Sam Adams and a few others and the Sons of Liberty, and they continued to protest throughout the various, as you know, the Tea Act and so on, all of the Stamp Act, all of the protests that went on. He was instrumental. James James, Mercy's husband, was also involved with the Sons of Liberty. By the way, Mercy is now married and she's having children. She has 5 sons, and she's raising them in Plymouth. And she's writing what a good colonial woman would do, nature poetry, not very harmful. Although she's complaining about her husband who's spending a lot of time in Boston and not in Plymouth. Anyway, let me fast forward. John Adams soon becomes friendly with James Warren through the Sons of Liberty, and also because John Adams is an attorney and he's making the circuit. He comes here to Plymouth, so he knows the sheriff, which is Mercy's husband. And pretty soon, the Warrens, Mercy and her husband, invite the Sons of Liberty to come and have meetings here, since there are so many spies in Boston. Who's going to think about people meeting here? And so Mercy becomes the hostess for these meetings. And she's sitting in, as she should, after providing a meal and listening to the conversation, in the chimney corner where a good colonial woman would sit during the meal as hostess. Well, of course, she begins to comment a little bit, and it's clear very quickly that she's knowledgeable and sensible and devoted as a patriot. And John Adams perks up his ears. And he soon learns she's also writing. Now, let me fast forward to what happens to Jemmy, and then I'm going to talk about the Boston Tea Party. Jemmy, in 1769, he's always writing treatises against the British, and against particularly British officers. And finally, he insults some of the most important officers by calling them blockheads in print. This did not go over well. And so one day when he is at the coffee house, the British coffee house, everything was British, he is brutally assaulted, so badly assaulted that, as John Adams writes, the cut in his forehead was so deep you could lay a finger in it. And he never recovers his sanity. And he is eventually, even though he is considered, the spark, quotes, the spark that lit the American Revolution, you never hear about him, and you probably didn't learn about him in your history book in high school. He's very rarely mentioned, because he is, after that, since he never recovers his sanity, he is shunted off to various farms by the families because he is mentally, not well. Well, that leaves Mercy in a strange situation, because she's very close to her brother. Not only is she upset about him, but he has massive correspondence with the Whigs in Parliament, who were trying to defend the American colonists against the British in Parliament. And so she starts writing to them to apologizing that they won't hear from him again. He's very ill. And pretty soon she's corresponding with some of the more powerful ones, including Catherine Macaulay, who's not in Parliament, but very close to, let's say, the reins of power. And pretty soon begins a political back and forth set of correspondences between them, and she finds herself, of course, embroiled. Not only is she listening to these conversations with her husband and the Sons of Liberty and what's happening, but she is now totally embroiled in it. And John Adams, when the Boston Tea Party happens, talks to her and says, "You need to write a poem about this." And she defers. Oh no, I can't do this. I'm just a woman. Don't forget, women weren't supposed to talk politics. Women were supposed to be home and hearth. Women were supposed to be silent. The men were the ones. Certainly, most women at that time, and many women, did not even really know how to read, much beyond at a very elementary level. Maybe some Bible, maybe a little computation for household, but that's about it. But she was so educated. So she finally does write the poem, and it's about the squall of the sea nymphs, and funny line in it, when the nymphs are in Boston Harbor and they sip into the water, it tastes like Soolong and Souchong tea. And so it makes a big hit. No, her name isn't on it. No, women don't write and they don't speak. But it becomes very popular. And things get from bad to worse after 1773, as you know. So she starts writing these satirical poems, these plays. It's kind of a Saturday Night Live. Now, they're quaint if you read them today, but they're lampoons of various and sundry characters, and there are a number of them. The first one's the adulator. Excuse me. The second one is the defeat. She's predicting the defeat of Hutchison and other people, and how truth and patriotism and honesty and thrift and all the American, what we call American values, will prevail over this terrible oppression from the crown. And finally, and John Adams rushes them into print. Of course, he's behind her all the time, goading her on. And Abigail, who she's close to, is also goading her on. She hesitates. Despite her outspoken words, she's very timid when it comes to being acknowledged and acknowledging herself. And finally, and he keeps putting them in print. They're in the Boston Patriot, they're in the Massachusetts Spy, they're everywhere. They're posted, they're created in pamphlets, they're circulated, enormously popular, no name, no byline. A funny story about that I'll get to later. And finally she writes in late 1774, The Group, which is the most vicious of all, and the most vehement and the most really calling for rebellion. And it's right before, April 19th. And John Adams rushes it into print even before it's in full draft, and he rushes it into print. Meanwhile, James has become very active, not only in Sons of Liberty, but also in the Provincial Congress. That's the rebellious Congress, quietly, that is happening. And so after bloodshed breaks out, he's in Watertown at that Congress at the Edmund Fowle House, and he comes back. And the two of them, he tells her what's happened, the two of them ride off. Remember, she has these 5 sons at home. The two of them ride off to Rhode Island to warn Nathaniel Greene and others of this rebellion that's happening. So her play has come out just as probably the final sort of ping that just, lights everybody up to this rebellion. Her husband eventually, after Dr. Joseph Warren, not related, dies at Bunker Hill. Her husband becomes the head of the Provincial Congress. And so it goes. Now Mercy finds herself not only frightened and talking, writing back and forth with Abigail, to whom she's very close, but frightened about what's going to happen with her sons and what's going to happen. Is her husband going to go to war? And her husband does become involved in the early years with the British occupation of Boston. And one son goes to war at that point, the oldest one. By the way, people are always asking, feminists ask, well, she believed in education, so wasn't she an early, we'll say feminist, the word wasn't coined then. Oh no, she said, because Abigail asked her, and she asked John, don't forget the ladies, remember the ladies. And she asked Abigail asked her, well, will you join me in this and we can prevail on John and all the new things that are going to be written? And she said she can't. I have to tell you, the 20th century feminists threw up their hands when they came across this stuff and was, she's not a feminist. Well, there's a reason for it. And the reason being that her oldest son was at Harvard and he was drinking a lot. Now, a woman was judged on her merit of her home and her children and her family and how everybody did well, and now her son is about to be maybe kicked out of Harvard. He wasn't, but she can't afford then to start looking for women's, what we'll call, liberation. So she doesn't. The feminists are very disappointed in Mercy Warren. But anyway, Mercy, meanwhile, she misses her husband terribly. A lovely, beautiful love story between them, which is pretty good to see that, these letters in print between them are very devoted no matter what's happening. And he's often in Watertown, where the headquarters are for much of what's going on with the British and the American, the new Continental Army, before it was even Continental Army. And she misses him terribly, and so she commutes back and forth, sometimes in a one-horse shay. Now, if you've taken a ride from here to Watertown, you know what a long ride that is for all of us, right? But you can imagine her in a one-horse shay, but a little dangerous anyway for a woman by herself, all the way to see her husband and to stay there. She stops to see Abigail. She stops and she visits with Abigail. And Abigail, like her husband John, who's now in Philadelphia at the Continental Congress, various versions of it, is alone. And Abigail and John say to her, you really ought to write this stuff down. This stuff is history in the making. You should record it. And she thinks about it. And she takes notes. When she's in Watertown at the revolutionary headquarters, she sees many people, all the great names you can think of, all the patriots who come through Boston. And of course she knows George, and she meets Martha, and she knows Ben Franklin, and so on and so forth. But she also, John Adams, meanwhile, in Philadelphia, saying, what's happening? What's happening here? Remember, we didn't have cell phones then. And so it's Mercy who becomes the one who communicates what's happening with here in Boston at the time. So she is, John, this just goes, John, further. You've got to write a history of all of this. Anyway, at this point she doesn't. And finally, when it's time for the army to move south, General Warren, her husband, is supposed to go with them. And Mercy, as I said, there's this funny, timid side, this other side of her. She won't let him go. She's desperate for him to stay. And so again, the historians have thrown their hands up and say, oh, the guy's a coward. And his wife is no feminist. So that's how it went in history. Or another reason why we kind of are only beginning to rediscover her. Ultimately, he stays. He becomes very active in Boston. He eventually becomes part of the Navy Board, many other things. John Adams wants him to be on the new court, what would have been the Supreme Court here. No, he won't do that either. It's too much time away. Long story short, Mercy finally starts to write this history of the American Revolution, little by little. I have to say, smallpox had invaded Boston as well. Thank you for the British brought it here, the soldiers, and people are getting inoculated. Well, I won't say inoculated, variolated, which was basically scratching somebody's pus who's ill with it and into your own arm or your hip. That was before we had hypodermic needles. And it worked most of the time, not all, but most, and most people survived. I think it's like a 75% survival rate. But she went to Boston with her husband and with Abigail, and they had it done. But she did not recover well. It took her a lot longer than them, and her eyesight was never good after that. So, because it's the disease runs rampant. In any case, she continues to write. She writes more plays. But she starts to write the history of the American Revolution, and little by little. Her oldest son will eventually help her when he returns. He has to have his leg amputated, because of the sea battle. But he eventually will help her because her eyesight. But she's collected all this stuff and she's written it. But obviously it needs to be rewritten somewhat or redrafted. By the end of the Revolution, though, when we started adopting English customs and English clubs and English clothes, we're importing them again, and we're becoming imitative of England, and there's a hue and cry in this country for maybe American industry and other things. It sounds familiar today. But also importing the idea of sort of a quiet caste system, which is exactly opposite what the early patriots wanted. It was supposed to be a brotherhood for all. It was supposed to be equality, justice, no classes, and yet we start to have clubs, and we start to have the rich and the poor, and we start to have all these things. And Mercy and her husband become terribly disillusioned. Meanwhile, John Adams is off soon, and has been back to Europe, and of course he's a commissioner in France and then in Netherlands and so on, and helping with funding. And Abigail goes with him. By the way, Abigail doesn't want to go. She's frightened of crossing the Atlantic. And here's Mercy won't let her husband go to New York for the army 10 years before. But Mercy says to Abigail, "Oh, go ahead, you'll be all right. You'll be all right. It's okay, you go." So there's a lot of ironies there. But what happens is the Adams become, obviously, because representatives of the new United States become, let's say, involved with showing the magnificence of the United States, living well, staying in good places, being in courts, and so on. This is totally against what the Warrens believe, and so there's a great divide, and people who were once very close no longer are. Mercy at one point even really accuses John and the Warrens, her husband, maybe he would like thinks monarchy might work better than democracy. So there's a great cooling. By the way, after the ratification of the Constitution, Mercy is very upset. In fact, one of the chapters in my book starts that way, but because she says, where's the Bill of Rights? There are a lot of liberties here that are left out. This is all federal stuff. And so she writes a treatise, which again is not signed, but if I'm just signed by a Colombian patriot. But it's observations on the Constitution, on the state and federal governments, and it becomes very important. Massachusetts is one of the first places that ratifies the Constitution, but with the proviso that this document or the principles in it are also adopted. That's the advisor. And so eventually this is taken as one of the bases for what become later the Bill of Rights. Again, unacknowledged because her name isn't on there. Mercy and Mercy and her husband James are very upset about what's happened to America. And they retreat. They live for a while, actually in Hutchison's old home over near Blue Hills, and enjoyed that for a while. It's great glee. But they move back to Plymouth and they kind of retreat into themselves. Mercy's still trying to write her history. And as I say, when her son, who has recovered from his amputations and so on, I said, it's feeling she's getting older, finally, in 1805, publishes the history of the rise, progress, and termination of the American Revolution. It's 3 volumes, very large. It's in, of course, to our eyes, it's in neoclassical language. It's very interesting. And it's a whole history of the Revolution. And of course, she still communicates. James, her husband, doesn't, but she does with Abigail and with John a little bit, although they're on opposite ends of the political spectrum. Let's say the Federalist versus she's an anti-Federalist. She still wants him to approve of her history. It's sent to President Jefferson, who sent copies of it to his council. There are subscriptions to it. That's how books were sold in those days. Things go pretty well with that, but she gets very few reviews because, after all, it's a woman who wrote it. There have already been 2 other histories of the Revolution. She gets one little scant review in which, at the end, the man who wrote it sniffs and he says, "But it has the scent of a woman." And this doesn't please her. But she's waiting for John to respond to this. He had been her mentor so many years before. 2 years go by. It isn't until 1807, in the summer, that he responds with a letter in which he says he thinks that he's read it, he's completed it, and he wanted to know, just let her know in the spirit of friendship, that he has a few corrections. And what ensues is a 16 or 20-page hand-inked letter with corrections. And she's horrified, and she throws up her hands, and she takes a few days, and she writes back to him defending it all. Well, he sends another letter, and again she writes back, and more corrections. He's saying, and this goes on. He writes her 10 letters of 20 pages each that summer. And she responds 5 to 6 times. The last time, of course, well, there's some funny lines in it, and they're really something. I mean, I'll just give you one little. He says to her, "Your 31st chapter, madam, tastes a little bit like, as the French would say, vinegar after dinner." So this is John Adams doing his crotchety thing. But she's horrified and crushed. And finally, her last letter, she says, "You have to apologize to me." Well, his gripe, really, is not facts. His gripe, and he says so, is that she didn't give him enough credit in this revolutionary history. He did a lot more, and he was really responsible, and he was the most important, and why isn't he acknowledged? And she finally says to him, basically, if you need to write more about this, why don't you write your own biography? And of course he does start, but he he actually stops mid-sentence at some point and never finishes it, so we don't really know. But again, the chill now becomes cold, becomes frigid, if you will. Ice cold, there's no communication, except occasionally she and Abigail speak. Now, Mercy, because she's so learned, had been one of the tutors for John Quincy Adams, and she'd also had Nabby, their daughter, stay with her, and she taught her a lot of things. So when Nabby dies of breast cancer in 1812, the Adams let her know, and she's just horrified and saddened and so on. And then there's somewhat of a reconciliation with Abigail, with her and Abigail. And then 2 months later, John Adams hasn't spoken to her in many years now, so written to her or whatever, writes to her and starts sharing memorabilia about her and Jemmy, her brother, years ago, and Sons of Liberty and so on. And there's a warmth that then emerges. And now we're into the War of 1812, but now let's go to 1814. So this goes on between 1812 and 1814. And finally, she writes to him that summer in August, and she said, "Can you do me?" And they're having these conversations going back and forth by mail, and he says, "Can you do me a favor?" And he says, "Can you do me a favor?" She says, "Can you do me a favor?" And he says, "Yes." She said, "Could you please go to the Boston Athenaeum, and could you please correct the now published version of The Group, her third and most incendiary play, because it has somebody else's name on it." There was no copyright in those days, so naturally people had plagiarized it over and over again. And so he says he will. And so he does. He rides to Boston. He's in his 70s. She's now 80, almost 84. I'm sorry, almost 86. And he does, and he writes. If you go to the Boston Athenaeum and you ask to see the group, what they have, you'll see that he's written on there that he confirms that this play was written by, to my knowledge, this play was written by Mercy Otis Warren, signed President John Adams. Mercy Otis Warren dies soon afterwards, just 2 months later. But somehow her legacy has continued on. As I said, Elizabeth Elliot, who was a 19th century journalist who wrote the 3-volume history of women of the American Revolution, included her in a book. But really up until the 20th century, and mid-20th century at that, we didn't really hear much about her. Thank you, Barnstable, for putting her statue up when you did, which was truly remarkable, and really, I guess it was one more goad for me to write the book. I just want to read you one portion of a sentence in her history of the rise, progress, and termination of the American Revolution, because I think it applies today as well as it did then. And she writes that though there was some agitation of spirits between existing parties in government, she hopes it would evaporate, and quote, "The present representative government may stand for ages a luminous monument of Republican wisdom, virtue, and integrity. To achieve that," she reminds readers, quote, "the elective franchise is in their own hands, that it ought not to be abused, either for personal gratification or the indulgence of partisan acrimony." And then she writes, "Above all, the principles of the revolution ought to be the pole star of the statesman respected by the rising generations." Thank you very much.